All right, guys. I'm guessing you can probably hear me and I don't need a mic.
What?
Oh, we're back? Yeah? All right, good. I see I'm up. All right, so this is that diversity panel, and I'm going to tell you right now I have like 7 slides. But these 7 slides are actually to keep us focused and lay down some ground rules. And just like, there's an image. And then you might see me thumbing through things. What I thought might be nice is when people start citing stats or want a representative image, we got like this library of 60 or so images. I'm going to try and find the right one of that. And so don't think I'm like checking the internet for weird things. Okay? All right, so my name is Grace, and we've got a number of panelists here. And actually, in a second, have them introduce themselves. And I'll start with myself. The reason we're doing this is just so you understand where we're coming from. We've got kind of a nice diverse set of perspectives on diversity in games. So I'm Lindsay Grace. I'm the director of American University's Game Lab, which is actually 2 initiatives. It's a graduate degree in persuasive play and game design, and also a studio. We're producing small, sort of independent style games. I've been teaching for 11 years, so any answer I have is largely going to be informed from an academic perspective. I also, so you know where I'm coming from, so we run a game diversity workshop every year, and we invite people for free, we even feed you for free, just to talk about diversity, how we can both increase diverse representation within games, and also how we can change the workforce and get more voices involved in the workforce. James.
All right. Hey everybody, I'm James Portnow. I have worked on games as a designer from Call of Duty to League of Legends to Farmville. I taught for many years at the UN. I found games good. Most people don't know me as a game person on the internet. I write extra credits and extra history, so that's pretty much me.
Luke.
I'm Luke Peterschmidt. Most of my time has been spent in the tabletop game space the last 20 years. I've done Popular Online, worked with the Coast, and a lot of that stuff. I also teach critical game analysis at Harrisburg University, which is the school of Oregon. And I make games with my friends out of the company. I want to stop one second. First of all, this is the best name for a diversity panel ever. We always have these.
Yeah.
So I do 2 quick requests. One, ask the really hard questions when you get there. Short, non-rambling, but hard questions. 2, everyone in this room is here because you want it to be better. Be respectful when someone asks a hard question that might be insulting to you. We're trying to get a discussion going here. We're not trying to make you feel. And 3, I will answer your questions with complete honesty.
Great.
Arthur Chu. Hi, I'm Arthur Chu. I'm probably the least
Or the most humble.
I've been a MAGfest SMD for 5 years. I hosted my wife at MAGfest. I don't stop that. And let's see here. I have a lot of money in the game show Jeopardy. And as a result, I was kind of like a viral celebrity, and I started writing for Daily Beast and Salon, and I've been writing a lot about nerd culture, games, how those things relate to each other. I'm not actually a games writer, although my first piece with Polygon is coming out on Monday. Anyway, so yeah, and I'll be doing the game later on.
Hi, I'm Elisa. I am a PhD candidate in comparative sociology. I'm studying the intersections of gender, authenticity, and the video games Rock Band and Rocksmith. I get to do that, and eventually I'll be a doctor. For my day job, I am a college professor teaching intro to sociology, individual and society, college readiness, and then I'm also a high school teacher. Somehow I'm teaching AP human geography. That's what I do, and then sometimes when I wanna, I'll be a freelance writer. Done a couple of things for like Polygon and Slate and
All right. My name is Sujan Shrestha. I'm an assistant professor at the University of Baltimore in their game design program. Most of my experience comes from academic perspectives. I've been teaching for the last 8 years. So that's me.
So a couple of, before we get started, notes. One was actually already touched on. So first, we just want to sort of start with this premise that games are for everyone, and sort of understand that. And then also that we want to create a safe space. In case you don't know what a safe space is, we're basically saying we want people to be free to say what they need to say, and we'll sort of be blunt and forthcoming in everything that we say. Also, atypical for me somewhat, this is not a PowerPoint-driven panel, so this is one of the last times we're going to be touching on people who do this. But the idea is actually we're going to have a conversation. This is a space for questions, okay? And this is literally a space for questions, and also this screen is only going to have questions, and occasionally graphs, okay? So I'm laying the rules out here. So we'll show things like this, which looks really nice, and it's all just to show you that by some statistics, it's 89% male. It doesn't sound all that diverse. And also to remind you things like this, this idea that gamers aren't one thing, that we can kind of get beyond stereotype, and that's part of what we'd like to discuss. That is not the only gamer. And then just to get your brains going, to think about how we are totally sort of expectant of images like this, and then images like this seem sort of awkward. What does that mean, and why is that? And lastly, to just sort of share some of our own understanding and some perspective. So this is an interesting study about personal game census and basically representation by race. And I'm going to do my classic sort of, there's a stat, moving on. If you're really interested, ask questions about it, or check it out on the internet. So the first question we'd like to start with is, what do we mean by diversity these days? Any one of the panelists can jump in.
We just showed a graph of lots of different classifications of people. We do like to classify people, unfortunately. I think it also should include diversity of views as well. And obviously behavior, sexual orientation, all This is one of the things we all know.
Can you use your mic, please? No one be back here.
We still can't hear you!
Because my mic was totally turned off. Get on board. All right. I feel like I'll just do better like this. Can you hear me in the back now?
Yes.
All right, great. We'll just shout the entire panel, and next panel, maybe we're coming to my next panel, I will be completely hoarse. Great. All right, so I will now shout in your direction. I feel like you're absolutely correct. I feel like what we're talking about is diversity of perspectives. And those perspectives, all of our perspectives are informed by who we are. And part of who we are in our culture is our race, is our sexuality, is our religious beliefs, all of these sort of things. And so, absolutely, I mean, I agree with basically everything you said.
Keeping it in line with yelling, I want to make sure it doesn't sound like we're yelling at each other. But one of the things that I think people forget is also, and we were talking about this a little earlier, socioeconomics. Part of when we think about diversity is we think of either our slice of diversity and how we are looking to insert that, or we tend to just forget that diversity really is about multiple perspectives, and perspectives come from more than just race, gender, and religious background.
Intersectionality, do you speak it? It's, and I hate that I didn't have this image ready for you to bring up or anything, but one of the things that I do in my college readiness class is there's an entire thing about having, being comfortable with the idea that you might go to college and there might be some people that don't look like you, and how do you deal with that? There's this whole wheel, and I call it the wheel of diversity. Turn, turn, turn. Here's the lesson that you will learn. And it basically just has a pie chart of every possible thing that can make you different. From your ethnicity, your nationality, your race, your actual shade and what that shade might mean depending on what country you are in, your socioeconomic background, your work experience, your educational level, gender and sex and sexual orientation and performance, which are all different things. All of that stuff all mushed together. And then all of that stuff plays out in completely different ways. Let's hear more.
Yeah, I think one of the things that I think we forget, and we partially blame our culture in America, is partly we have to look at it from the world culture as well. Race, all these things are a perspective issue. If you go somewhere else, you'll see the same problem over and over again. It's just been replicated in different ways, different things, associated in a different value. So I think perspective becomes a thing. How can we change this? That is the first thing. What are the things we can do in games that can change the perspective of people as a human first, and then the rest of it is like.
I can shout, but
I like the way I sound when I do this. So bringing it back to games specifically, I mean, a lot of people sometimes joke, like, we have our own diversity categories in games. There's FPS players and RPG players. Is that as valid as race or religion? No, probably not. But no, there's a real sense in which gaming culture, the idea of a gaming culture, is flawed because, and we, you know, this is a thing to celebrate that we have our own culture, that we have our own history, that we kind of bond over. Yes, we all played, you know, Super Mario Brothers, and we all played Legend of Zelda. We remember being in front of the NES with our kid when we were kids. But, you know, that's not actually universal. And this thing that we call gaming is people come into it in different ways, and you get attracted to it in different ways, and that's affected by how much money you had when you were a kid, where you grew up. And so sometimes it is alienating when you kind of treat these like in-jokes, like, or, you know, when it goes the other way, you don't know that? How stupid are you? You haven't seen this video, you haven't played this game. But, you know, someone who started getting into games a couple of years ago through like mobile gaming or whatever is no less of a gamer than someone who's been gaming their whole life and started, you know, with the NES. And someone who might think they're casual because they started with the NES and they were playing in like the 70s on the old arcade machines. It's all relative. There's people from Europe who have a different sense of what the gaming culture is because there were different games that were popular there. Europe, Japan, even different parts of the country. There's different arcade scenes. And so we have to kind of recognize that there's no one gaming culture, even in like the seemingly superficial things, the jokes that we share, or the games that we remember, the memories that we have, you know?
I think we hammered that question pretty well. All right, we'll move on to the next one. Why does it matter? So you heard one answer.
I'm going to take this with the mic. So, I'm going to take this from a very creative perspective, not necessarily a cultural one. I think it matters because there's a million stories we haven't told. And we haven't told them because we haven't had the right people with the right experiences to tell them. So, I mean, very, very selfishly here. I want more diversity because I want more cool stuff to do. I want more cool characters to see, more cool stories to be told. I want to learn things. And I think diversity really helps that way. And I think it brings everyone together, but really selfish level. I just want more cool stuff.
And while we're talking selfish, one of the other things I think is really important is to remember that there's economic factors behind the industry itself. And so one of the arguments that I often make is just this idea that if we offer more diverse content that's produced by more diverse developers, then we're actually able to retain markets or move into other markets. So one of the big things in the business world is the fact that it looks like consoles are going to basically peak. And so there's this real question about whether or not we're actually going to find a way to increase audience. Luxury. There's this luxury of always having people more interested in games every year. Eventually, you need to figure out a way to get new people.
All right, I'll hop on using this mic trend. So I'm actually going to go with the moral. I think we have to make us better people and make for a better world. When a couple years back, I was at PAX, and a young woman walked up to me after a panel and told me about how she played World of Warcraft. And she played a great deal of World of Warcraft. She was in college. All she really wanted to do is go to her classes and play her video game, and she didn't care about much else. Didn't care about the world. And one day, one of her guildmates stopped showing up for raids, and this went on for a week, and then 2 weeks, and then she started asking around about if anybody knew this person or where they'd gone, what happened. And then she found out that they had lived in Iraq, and they had gotten killed in a drone strike. And she ended up, after that, switching to poli-sci and becoming a campaign manager for someone who is now a U.S. Senator and fighting against a lot of these sort of things. So, I mean, it really helps us understand other people and gives us a perspective on the world. Games are all stepping issues, just this tiny bit of a life that we would otherwise be able to perhaps come to sympathy, empathy, and understanding.
another analogy, I'm curious how people feel about this, that I've used is this sense of a diverse ecosystem. So diverse ecosystems are robust and can adapt and actually are generally much more stable than non-diverse ecosystems. And so part of the argument is most industries need diverse ecosystems in order to weather the storm.
I'd actually flip the script a little bit and say, often this is phrased in terms of like, we're talking to the gatekeepers. Are you going to allow diversity? Are you going to let there be diverse games? And I don't think it really works that way. I think the question is, there is going to be diversity. Are you going to fight it? Or is there going to be conflict over it? Or are we going to work with it? Because yeah, there are people who are in the position, and God bless them to say, I work for a AAA game studio, I'm going to greenlight this project, I'm going to throw a bunch of money this way. But even when that doesn't happen, marginalized voices find a way. Indie games are exploding, and they took sort of the AAA world by surprise. People weren't expecting it, and the AAA market is fragile. They're losing money to it. People are getting interested, and I want to see different things than I've been seeing. And it becomes a question not of like, am I going to up on my throne decide to let this happen or not, but it's happening. How are we, those of us who are already here, going to react to it?
I'm going to look at a small analogy I just thought about. Does everybody know someone who actually has been divorced, or your friends or someone? Okay, so this is the same analogy. I'm going to use that analogy as a part of why diversity matters. So if you know someone divorced, and I'm tagging along Luke's comment on there are just so much untold stories. The idea is, if you know one person in that divorce group, you'll be told the perspective of that divorce, what happened from one person. So the storytelling, not only the storytelling, but why diversity matters to me is also the idea of who tells the story and who hears it. And it's simply as that, it's that important. So that's my short one.
And I guess I could do the whole like big sort of rah-rah sis boom-bah. I keep thinking of like the idea of seeing like Nichelle Nichols as Uhura and having her be one of the only sort of like women of color on television that wasn't the help. And the idea that can inspire somebody that says, well, if she can be a scientist, I can be a scientist, I can be an astronaut, I can do good work. Media matters, pop culture matters, games are no different, and oftentimes there's a sort of kind of, in a very simplified sense, you can't be what you can't see. And I would love to see more of me. I would love to see, some more Puerto Ricans that are like more than just butts. It would be nice to just not be an ass all the time. Just, like as soon as I'm Puerto Rican, it would be nice to just not be J-Lo. That would be awesome. It would be nice, to be able to, create my own character and be my own rock star. I could be a guitar heroine, not just a guitar hero. It's nice to be able to see yourself in places and be able to put yourself in other people's shoes, but also in your own feels kind of good too.
All right. Ready for question number 3? Is there a point of optimal diversity? Well, we're talking economics.
But I would say that a good point to aim for is just representational diversity, right? We have hit nowhere near that chart you showed at the beginning of how we are divided as a society. That's not represented within the games industry at all, and I think that's a good first benchmark for us.
There is, and it was sliding family stones making cool. I think that you work towards, unfortunately, industries work towards their customers. So some of that chart is self-fulfilling, right? It's like we're throwing an algae to the fish that eats that. So we're making games people eat. I think the challenge is for us educators to do a better job of getting more people in the game making position. To me, that's sort of my skipping ahead.
But there's this issue that I encounter a lot as a consultant. You have to jump in and bring up these issues for you. It's self-reinforcing in a lot of different ways, right? If we are only, I hear all the time, I can't make a female lead character for this game because they don't sell me half hours. Well, part of the reason they don't sell is because we've never built up that audience, right? The reason that we have a lot of these gender game ideas is because we've actually reached So we also have to
the smaller organizations. I'm sure you have the same kind of pushback.
I mean, I'm a huge fan of the sort of the indie movement. I'm on the executive board for Global Game Jam. I really do think that that's one of the places. There's always been this tension for some folks where it's sort of like there are gatekeepers. And so what was really nice about both the mobile space and indies is that those gatekeepers have changed a little bit, and they've changed in a way that affords quality to sort of get through on its own quote-unquote merit. Let's ignore some of the statistics rigor that happens in the mobile space. And so it's sort of fun to see that transition. The graph, for those of you who can't see it maybe in the back that I'm showing right now, is actually a study that determined, compared the US Census to the people in games programs. And so you can see that we are highly male-dominated. And the other one, these are students by race. And so that first really long column is Caucasian, and the next one is African American and identifying as African descent. We have Hispanic, Asian, other, and decline to answer. See that slope that you see there. So when you talk about sort of the future, this is one way to analyze it, right? Is to say, well, who's in the pipeline? Who's coming up next? Why now? And I'm not talking about the National Organization of Women, I'm actually talking about the president.
That's one of Maimonides' questions, right? If not now, when? So that's...
That was Hillel.
Okay, sorry. I got mixed up my ancient Jewish philosophers. Sorry.
Well, I mean, I also think that there are economic factors at play as well. I think actually now is the perfect time because one, we have the opportunity to experiment with being cheaper. Engines are at a price they've never been. Individuals or small teams making these things themselves. And what we talked about earlier, AAA has finally reached this point where the budget for AAA games has gotten so large that the traditional gamer audience can no longer support that budget. You see most of these games, if you're greenlighting stuff at $60, $70, $100 million regularly, especially when we see games fairly frequently greenlit at $250 million, there just aren't enough of your traditional gamer audience, the audience that I hear referenced a lot, right, 14 to 30-year-old males, to support that type of budget. So we have to expand the audience if we're going to keep having giant games that we're talking about. And so I think economics are going to that too.
Tagging along to Gene's point, we have to think of it from the resources perspective. I think this is more about how much resources we have. And what Lindsay showed in the graph shows a perfect example of the race that equals to resources. Access to resources is another part. If you look at the construct of society and the way our society works in the class division in America, it does show that example, a perfect sense, how much resources and accessibility of those resources into group division that happens within America. Now, if you take that comparative study into world society, then there's another layer offset there. $60 per game is not a big thing in America. If you and I can work in a McDonald's, $7 an hour, one day work off that particular money that I can spend on a $60 game after paying taxes. Now, how many places in this planet you can go to and think about spending $60 per game? There is not many countries in this world where you can work one day and actually spend $60 per game. So you have to think from the resource and the accessibility perspective too. And so we always argue why there's always a illegal game functioning in China, India, and all over the other places of the world, and that is the primary reason. There's people who cannot access to games that is $60 an hour. How many people can actually prepare that? So we have to work with the industry and the indie games, which is actually the major part of where we can actually take the diversity in game into. So
I think one of the other interesting things to talk about why now, going back to the economic diversity, is I'll tell a personal story. So I grew up poor and didn't have a lot of access to a lot of great technology, and by chance I was actually able to buy a Apple II clone called a Laser 128, and then got a bunch of pirated software so I could learn about software, which made everything quite affordable, right? So the Laser 128 was literally a quarter the price of an Apple II. I used that computer for 8 years, so while everyone else has moved on, I was still using the same computer. But that accessibility, that fact that the price point had dropped to a point that I could actually afford it, afforded me the ability to participate in the space that I normally wouldn't be able to. Which is why, again, I'm such a fan of the indie space, because it gives people an opportunity to participate. When an industry had a threshold in console games, for example, that before your game could even be considered, it had to go through a $50,000 QA, you've just cut out a lot of people with a lot of ideas that just can't raise that or don't have that access. And that's part of why I think economic diversity is so important as well.
Piggybacking off of both of those, it's an interesting thing if you look at the media. We're in a time of very high tension. The center cannot hold. And I'm not going to source that because it's going to correct me. But you see the traditional distribution methods are failing. Movies are getting more and more bloated, more and more expensive, and the investors are getting more and more risk averse because the profits aren't coming as easily as they used to. So everything's a remake, everything's a sequel, everything is like a huge blockbuster. And it's even more the case in AAA gaming, and it's because there's a lot of reasons. One of the big ones is like as technology advances, it's harder to charge people for that. Piracy eats into it, and most importantly, it's just easier and easier for people to create. And so you're competing with a lot of free content out there. And it seems to me the future is on the small scale, on the other end of the scale. The future of investing is crowdfunding. The future of creation is, people with GoPros making their own films, people blogging instead of writing through traditional publishing. And indie games, the fact that anyone can pick up a game and make it, make their idea, their crazy idea. And 99.9% of them might be crap. The execution might be crap, but you find those gems that you would never have found, that would never have made it through, like even the first phase of a pitch meeting with a big investor because it was just too weird, too strange, or too off the wall, And that's what people are kind of hungry for. And we see like, clone FPS after clone FPS, Call of Duty 5, and people want something different. People who want something different all want something different. They don't want the same thing. And so diversity of one kind or another, that's where the future is headed.
Seems like a good time to ask, social media diversity, helpful or hurtful? I wanted my gaming show, of course. So what do you guys think?
I'll go positive. I'll go positive. Yeah, I'll go positive.
I think that because of things like the Twitters, I feel like I would not have been introduced to as much of this stuff if it hadn't been for my people. I would probably be stuck only looking at my television, and whatever's marketed to me on TV would be just like the thing that I would play. And all right, fine, whatever has the big budget to reach me is totally cool. But now, because you have your sort of own little space on social media that you can sort of reach and make connections, I've been introduced to a lot of smaller games that maybe I otherwise would not have been able to get into and champion. And then using my own platform, I have no idea how the hell I got even over 500 followers, much less I guess I'm at 34. If I can retweet something, then that might be, a couple of thousand, give or take 1,000 bots. That might be a whole bunch of people that might also be introduced to something that they might not have otherwise heard about. So I think it's good in the sense of being able to, hey, this thing is cool, link, and that can spread really, really quickly. On the other hand,
So it's super critical, but also super limited. Right? Our social network graphs tend to look like us and all of our friends. So when we're just talking to all of our friends, we're likely hearing the same thing over and over and over again. There are unique people, though, who have very large social networks, who can reach many, many more people. And I'm not one to burden them with the responsibility, but if social networks are going to be effective, it's going to take some, I don't want to say rock stars, rock star, right here. I'm talking about our yeah. It's going to take something special to get over that hump. I think what's more important is just quality and experience. I think great games now, because of the resources required, are so low, at a time where now I can walk into a boardroom of any Fortune 500 company and say, every one of you is a gamer. Right? So at the same time that the resources are lower, the number of potential audience has grown dramatically. Everyone who started with Candy Crush could be turned into some other kind of gamer at any point. So I think the opportunity is definitely there. But how do you reach that person who started on Candy Crush when everyone in your Twitter feed is your Magic the Gathering player friends? So there are some limiting points there.
So there's sort of a split we can have here and talk about this idea that there's a democratizing force, you could argue, in social media and in crowdsourcing, and this ability for people to say, I have a voice that actually can affect things, I don't have a go-between, I can do it myself. And then there's this, there are these communities of support. So this is a community of sort of support where you're posting. Do you want to describe it actually? Looks like you're passionate.
Yes. Well, I have contributed heavily to that website. FatOthers.orslutty.com is a website started by a colleague of mine, and it's basically sort of like a kind of we have to laugh in order not to cry, chronicling of some of the harassment that a lot of us get, and the title coming from, well, you're a woman playing games, you must be fat, ugly, or slutty. And I've contributed heavily to that website. And so there is also, I guess that can also kind of slide into maybe a discussion of anonymity and how that can kind of help / hurt things.
What a great idea! I really do agree with this.
Seamless.
Well, I don't know. I think I may have the most Twitter followers of anyone on here, but it's not necessarily a good thing. So believe it, it's not necessarily a good thing. But social media is it's a screwed up place. A lot of things can happen. And I speak as someone who's been, you know, attacked a lot on social media. First because of, I don't know if anyone followed the news story, but I was like the most hated person on Jeopardy when I was on Jeopardy, and I was like the villain of the show. It's a superlative. And then other stuff, which we can talk about later on today. But the thing about the internet and social media and anonymity and all that good stuff, this Wild West that we're living in, it amplifies unheard voices. It sort of breaks the media consensus, the respectable consensus that it used to be, even as short a time ago as like 20, 30 years ago, you could look on the news and believe this is what America believes, that America's consensus is around like the Republicans and the Democrats, that we all think this about race, we all think this about, we all like gay people, but we all think it's too early for gay marriage. Back in the 90s, that was what everyone thought on social. And what's happening now is like anyone, most of us never actually believed that, but the gatekeepers told us that we believed that. But then now we have the power to go online and say, no, this is what I really think. And that means that people are way more openly horrible than you thought they were in all kinds of ways. But also means that all the people who were shut out of that respectable consensus, it was great if you liked that consensus, if you fit into it, but if you didn't, then you felt left out in the cold. And there's a lot of LGBT people, for instance, who say, like, the one time that I realized I wasn't alone, I could find a community of people like me on the internet. Whatever community I want to call your community. And that's good and it's bad. But I would vote on the side of people who think that consensus wasn't so great for everyone. And it's really ugly when the consensus breaks. And I have like the open, like outright racists who are attacking and trolling the, the people who are outspoken, the anti-racist. You can say like people go too far. It's so-called Tumblr culture, which I hear a lot about. And yeah, there is a lot of toxic stuff that happens there. It's what happens when the dam breaks. When a lot of people are like, I've been forced to hide the things about myself for all this time, and now it's all coming out. We're still in the process of figuring out how to do that. But yeah, the fact that there's a lot of different identities, furries, otherkin, whatever, it's not my scene, but that there's people who have this thing they want to say about how they view the world, how I experience life, and I find other people who that metaphor or that narrative makes sense for me, and that's a powerful, positive thing. That there's such a thing as a black Twitter, that it exists because there's a lot of African American consumers of media who are like, I don't have anywhere to react. Where I don't feel like I'm the only black person saying like I see this screwed up, but that they found each other through this medium. And to me, that's a very powerful thing, and it's positive. In the long run, it's positive, even if we see a lot of backlash from the people fighting against it.
Well, and to just add to that, I mean, to me, we always see this, right? We always see this darkness before the dawn. When after World War II, the KKK was at its biggest, as we were desegregated, right? We always hear people howling the loudest right before they lose their power base. And so I think that while we're seeing a lot of horrible things on social media, we're seeing a lot of this terrible nastiness, I think it's actually a sign that we're moving forward.
Or that people are responding because they feel the actual pressure. Before it was not a thing they had to worry about, and now it's sort of like, oh my gosh, the world's getting diverse. What do I do? I'm actually going to skip one of the questions we had to ask a more practical question. So I think one of you proposed this. So where do business goals and diversity goals align or diverge?
Okay, so on budget for AAA titles, they completely diverge. Think about even just the movies, like the biggest movies of all time. They all tend to feature a Luke Skywalker, a father figure who's protecting a woman, and you get to these very stereotypical things because they work. Convincing someone to give you $300 million for a AAA title or $250 million AAA title and saying, and this one's going to be different, is extremely difficult to do. So I think they diverge at the high end. I think they completely converge, though, at the lower end of the spectrum. As tools get easier, as the audiences get bigger. My class is 60% African Americans that I'm teaching game studies to. So I see the future of lots of interesting perspectives for different types of people.
I would actually argue that, I mean, not only what I argued earlier about having to expand the audience in AAA, but that in AAA as well, it's essential that you at least are aware of the diverse, because, right, we saw recently things like Assassin's Creed, and I think they lost a ton of sales off that. I remember, so if any of you remember, way back in Windows 95. So when you clicked on the clock, it showed this little world map of the places of the different time zones, and you could select what time zone you were in. And India and Pakistan had a border dispute. And the part of the world that India claimed that was also part of Pakistan wasn't marked as India on that map. And so India refused to use a single copy of Windows 95, and they lost literally tens of billions of dollars, right, by not being aware of these things, by not having the cultural awareness of what mattered to people across the world. So I mean, I think it is really important for businesses to have that cultural awareness.
It sort of leads us to our next question anyway, so we can answer either one of these at the same time. So stereotype, international politics, cultural elements, and also worldly considerations. So often, if you are in the U.S. Or North America, you might think of diversity in North American terms, and you think of it with a sort of perspective that's sort of North American. And then someone had brought this up, I think it was Arthur had brought this up as a sort of, well, let's think about some of the dynamics of the cultural politics and the cultural standards. So if we were to look at some of the images that I think people sort of say, oh yeah, that's what gaming does. So I'm just going to give you a few here just to remind you in case you haven't seen or forgot these. And they're sort of a product of a culture of sorts. And so it's interesting to ask the question of sort of the international politics or the understanding of other cultures, right, as a reflection of understanding how the world works.
Well, I mean, I think the important thing is to understand that we create, right? That we are mass media, and especially America's thing is export, especially American games industry. I've done this Call of Duty, you will see Call of Duty sites everywhere in the world. I just was in Turkey, and people were talking about Call of Duty, right? And we have to realize what we do as we build these games. We have to be more conscious. I will be completely frank with you. One of the most horrific moments in my career as a game designer is after creating the first Modern Warfare. I had never heard, and I checked that nobody had ever heard the term Sans on Xbox Live before Call of Duty. And then we replaced with Indians or you were Nazis, right? Your stereotypical enemies who America has always decided are the people who are going to get killed, who we're going to shoot at, is with people in turbans, which isn't even accurate itself, right? We tried to do a lot of Modern Warfare, but it's gotten worse and worse over the iterations. But just simply by doing that, right? By painting everyone who is the enemy as of one race or one faith, we created whole new epitaphs, whole new types of hate. And so we just have to be very careful about what we do, because we
our creators and players.
Just tagging on to James' point, since he worked in Call of Duty, I was sort of the idea of acceptance too, social acceptance, right? So we talk about diversity all the time, we argue about it, we want to change diversity, but why do we accept these games that actually does not promote diversity? What is the phenomenon there in ourselves as a gamer? Why do we play Call of Duty, which actually makes a lot of money killing Middle Eastern looking men all the time? What is that phenomenon that we have? You know, film did the same thing, believe me or not, back in the days. I think a lot of people were Russian looking at one point because there was a stigma against being Russian or looking Russian. So I mean, I think now games are looking like a lot of the games have Middle Eastern looking. There are games that actually does do simplification of how genders and how race looks like, but a lot of these games. And so the idea is, why are we accepting these games as a culture? And what is that phenomenon with us? I mean, it's like a doctor telling you don't smoke a cigarette, it kills you, but you still do it. Don't eat McDonald's fries, it will kill you eventually. We still go and eat McDonald's fries. So why? Why are we doing it? I think it is about social acceptance. The more we accept socially certain conditions, the more we are going to promote some of these diversity issues. And as we do this, you know, whether it's Call of Duty or indie games, perhaps we have to think from that perspective as well.
Yeah, I mean, going off of what is it that you find acceptable, I don't think anybody sets out to say, I'm going to stigmatize and demonize, like consciously says that, but it's, what is an acceptable target? I mean, one of the most important things that I remember hearing about the game America's Army, which was literally a recruiting tool for the U.S. Army, as an FPS, and in the multiplayer, the Army, when they commissioned it, said, you cannot shoot U.S. soldiers. You cannot portray it being a good thing, a positive thing to kill U.S. soldiers. So your team looked to you like U.S. soldiers, and you were fighting generic Middle Eastern guys, whereas to them, they thought they were the U.S. soldiers, and they saw you as the generic Middle Eastern guys. And if you went to the third-person camera and observed the game, you saw two groups of Middle Eastern guys shooting at each other. It was like, you couldn't ask for a more perfect metaphor, you know? And it's just that kind of thing. How do other people in other parts of the world, how are they going to see it? When it's just like, we casually, not even necessarily mean anything by it, but we need to kill some people. And we can't have it be American soldiers being killed as the enemy, so we're going to make it you. Like, North Korea, I don't like North Korea. But North Korea is like the acceptable villain, and it's kind of messed up if you think about how a North Korean defector sees that. When they ask a North Korean defector, what do you think about the movie The Interview? It's like, they don't take anything about our country seriously. It's a big joke, you know? That you can treat what would a new Korean war look like. You can make it the plot of a video game that's mainly going to be played for the titillation of, you know, fighting and killing in a morally acceptable way, where it wouldn't be if it was, you know, GTA is edgy because the people that you're killing are Americans, and a different game can be like a black and white world who's safe because the people you're killing are North Koreans. That's the kind of thing that is a challenge for like looking at how we're exporting our culture to the rest of the world.
So I want to, not shift, but I just want to highlight something I think we haven't talked about much. So I'm a game designer. I've been teaching game design for a while, and I make a bunch of games, and so you kind of touched on it, which is why I want to mention it. So I made a game years ago that's actually, it was called Third World Shooter, but I actually call it Third World Shooter because it was that bad. I was trying to do this sort of like, great, I'm going to have a game that's going to flip the Tom Clancy standard, and you're actually going to be the Middle Eastern, or I'm sorry, the colony trying to break out of colonization. So it was taking place in West Africa, and it was someone kind of considered an ally now, but at the time we were sort of using them in this pawn game as part of the Cold War. So I did all this work, and then it's a junk game, but one of the things I did learn from it, and a lot of what I do as a designer, is I'm actually really interested in how the mechanics can promote diverse perspectives. So when we talk about diversity so often, we talk about the representation, the images of people that we see, and the anthropomorphic images of people that we see. And I actually think there's a lot of potential in discussing and supporting diverse ways of solving problems in games, because games are really about problems. And so the solutions we have can often be quite affected by our own socio-political backgrounds. So we have a lot of games in the US, for example, that are about one person versus the world, right? We love that narrative, we love the cowboy, but there's so many other narratives and so many other ways to solve problems. I made a really, again, quick little game around the idea that you actually had to meet multiple player characters' goals So the idea is that if you hit left, one guy goes left, but the other one's facing the wrong direction, so he goes up, and you're trying to get them to exits. And what I was trying to do is get people to think about universal benefit instead of individual benefit, which is a really common mechanic in games. Yeah, so I just want to remind you, so I put up dysphoria because it was one of the images I had, of this ability for games to do something more than other media. I can represent lots of things in games, but so can movies and so can books. But experiencing is a very, very different thing. And I think that's one of the affordances that games have that we sometimes forget about for all kinds of rhetoric-rich play.
I want to add a game to that list, I think, also, is that I will sometimes play it. I'll sometimes have my students play it in my individual and society class when we talk gender and sexuality. And I'm going to butcher it because it's one of those words that I've only read it, but I've never actually heard it pronounced. It's like, I think it's like Mainichi? Probably? Yes? Okay, I'm seeing nods. Perfect. And it's by Maddie Bryce, and it's an amazing game. It's basically just an everyday experience.
It looks like this.
Yeah, there you go. Bless your heart. I love it. You're awesome. And it's basically just your everyday experience as a trans woman, and you're basically, it's like wake up, and then you just have to kind of make these sort of everyday mundane decisions.
That's Maddie Bryce.
Right. Love her. And basically, the decisions that you make every day that you can often take for granted, like do you decide to shave, or if you're feeling really, really tired, do you take a nap and not shave, decide to put on makeup? And then things like that, when you go out into the world, that will change the way that people react to you. And it's oftentimes the things that we take for granted in terms of our everyday expression can oftentimes have very serious and, sometimes even deadly consequences for people. So that's also a really good way for people to kind of actually experience what that might be.
So we talk too much, I apologize, I just realized that, because we got 10 minutes for questions. So, Grumpy Cat wants to know what you think. Yes?
How do I stop the despair? I've had a lot of women engage in game creation and say, great, get this game in by this time, we'll put it on our store, we'll go. And they either have said, no, I can't do this. Like, yeah, you can do this. You're smarter than that guy. He's some random Call of Duty Joe Blow. And this is, I've offered here, and this is, people like, no, I can't do this, is what I hear most often whenever I try to get a diversity viewpoint. What to?
Okay, so I'll talk from a director perspective. So we just started this degree.
Also, we heard that when you're making the game, you're not allowed to use geometry. You're not allowed to put protagonists into third people yet.
Yep.
And it gets double blind rated by everybody that we have on staff to make sure there's not cultural buzzword or dog whistling.
Yep.
Still, what do?
Yep. All right. So I just started a program at American University, and I'm super proud of our demographics. We'll label people as such. So we just, one of the ways that we really made for a more diverse set of graduate students is we changed a couple of things. We changed where we were going to recruit and announce our program. So we didn't use the usual venues. We used a diverse set of venues. We also created an environment that champions a culture. So one of the, I've been teaching games for a long time. I've been in this sort of games education world for a long time, and one of the things that I think is very challenging is sometimes when we encourage that sort of highly competitive environment where if you didn't come in with something, then you don't have a chance winning everybody else over, we end up isolating a whole population. And it's not just by gender, it's just a lot of people are like, I don't want to be in that environment. I actually want to be in a cooperative environment, or I want to be in an environment that's looking to help me succeed, not telling me, you know, if I level up, then I get to do something cool. And so I think part of it is about it's about the stuff you do beforehand, and it's also about the peer group having the right attitude about including people. Yeah?
It's a team program, and whoever scores lowest on the quiz and the person has to give the presentation, so everybody has to teach each other everything. No, we've gone to the teamwork angle, we have the master social people trying to do that, still what to do.
So just take a deep breath. I always say that's the first thing.
So just real background. I teach, so is my wife at elementary level, and the #1 indicator of success in school is income. So there are challenges with just lower income that are always going to be there, and it's very hard to hit at probably the age level you're going at. For the women, bring in a successful female game designer. First day, that's what they need to see. They need to see themselves doing it because they can, and they're showing this great.
The bring them in top to be free, that's just because I'm not allowed to bring guests for free.
So, this may not actually be helpful for your program, but when I was working with a school in Oakland, and I had a place where kids would come in and tell me I couldn't do my homework because we were having my bathroom kids who were pushing it, right? And we were playing Mario, and this kid, maybe probably heard me relate this story, this kid runs and jumps, runs, jumps. It's so different because it's awesome. And it opened up this conversation about the fact that was his life, right? That he had never thought about himself as an agency. He never thought about himself as living in the moment. He couldn't envision a future in which he could be successful, right? And just having this school, all these things are supposed to impart agency, right? That's the whole point of school. Go to school so you can have like at least in theory, right? That's what it should be. And games are also all about agency. And they're an excellent place to start that discussion and say, hey, no, it may be hard, it may be next to hard, but there is some pathway. There is some way that you can get either some set of decisions you can make that will affect your future. Can you envision this? Figure out that path, right? Just like you do in the game. And I wouldn't say, it wouldn't say it was right, but it opened the door just a little bit. So that's the one piece of advice I have.
So,
Well, no, just like briefly, like if you can't bring in someone, then like YouTube a talk, like maybe have them only play Revolutionary Acts. You know, like only have them play things created by like non-Muslim people. It's just like keep going.
Keep trying.
Keep fighting with it. Without a doubt. There's a question in the middle, and I said number 2 before. Is it? Okay, great. Get it.
So this is something that's been bothering me for a long time, and it's how do we solve the problem of globalized culture, so standard Western culture, and looking with individual groups, specifically more conservative groups who don't want to integrate, and how do we get them to integrate rather than vice versa?
Lots and lots of people make games for lots and lots of people, and there will always be the self-centered. Right? The reason Call of Duty is usually shooting someone with brown skin is because that's who we're scared of most at the moment. Like I said, Russians before, we were scared of Russians, so it was them before. It will be very hard to make a culturally significant game that doesn't offend someone from somewhere if you take a creative chance. It's possible, it's definitely possible, but it's not likely. Especially from strong point of views. I don't mean to be negative, I just think it's very hard. But as a community and a culture, as long as we welcome people and expect from our creatives a variety of views, I think we'll do better.
I think, on a wholly pragmatic perspective, people respond to things like money. So when they see a missing opportunity, unfortunately, they will say, gee, you know what? We can get money from this audience that we haven't engaged. And in part, you see, we didn't talk about this, but there's things like Left Behind, which have a very sort of strong, religious, very relatively conservative perspective, and that's a diverse voice. So there's also this plenty of opportunity for people who may not, I mean, I haven't seen an anti-diversity game, but that would add to the diversity, right? Actually, I forgot. I've written about them, so I linked them out as a quote. I don't ignore that part.
So the game changer part for game development, as I see it, coming from a work perspective, is the free gaming that's available widely all over the world. And specific to your question is, it's a changing phenomenon. I've been traveling the world all over places, and I've gone to many universities, talking to students and how they're doing in the game development. Not much so in the third world countries, but it is a changing phenomenon. People are starting to adapt these engines and start to play around with it. It might take about 10, 15 years, maybe 20 years by the time you see some of the artifacts from these development, but surely that is the first and foremost. Engine accessible. And then you can put in your narrative, start to do, I mean, you cannot stop building, or a birth of a talented person in somewhere else on the planet other than the United States, believe me or not. There are incredibly talented programmers in Africa, Asia, and all over the places. As soon as they get the understanding of how these games works and how they can actually make money part, we will start to see, especially growing countries like India and China, where economic growth is highly heavy in some of the other parts of the world. So
your question was how we expose people who are resistant to diversity to use diversity, correct?
And the other way around.
Sure. Okay. Well, I'm going to answer this part that I just stated because I have an answer for that one. From a design perspective, I have seen a very effective technique where you basically pull the rug out from it, right? I think one of the best examples of this is that is the pop culture spectrums, right? It was a game where it started out with all your expectations, not the person who you were trying to reach was resistant to being reached. It seemed exactly like it was designed for them, and then all of a sudden, when it starts to feel like they're already cooked, they're already invested in it, then like that, right? We show them, oh, wait, maybe there's a different perspective. And so, if you're just from a pure design perspective, I think that's very effective.
There were two questions we can give them like a minute.
So we took it out of time.
Okay, we also want to better with your response. Both of you, why don't we just do that? So one
I was just wondering, are you going to be doing a game about diversity?
I've done a couple. Yes.
So last year, I said I told myself to do 12 games in 12 months on Kickstarter, and I was going to do one with her, and I got pulled away. And I want to do a game that teaches the core concepts of feminism, as it pulled the rug out from underneath you. And I also wanted to do a graphic novel on Kickstarter where you could buy the race and sexual preference of every character. So I wanted people to tell me what they wanted them to be. And it's just a massive sociology experience. I wanted to see where they would end up. Like I would define the characters with nothing, and I'd say you can take the race, the sexual preference, and if you want the character to matter to the narrative. So you could just happen to be a transgender Samoan, and that's fine. Or maybe you wanted some of your Samoan culture to give you some of your superhero power. So we're all thinking about stuff like this. It's a fantastic design.
So I'll give you a rundown really fast. 5 or 6 years ago, as part of my critical gameplay project, one of the mini games I made was a game called Black White. It's basically a platformer where all the non-player characters and the player characters look exactly the same. So the only way you can tell a threat from a non-threat is by checking their behavior. So as you approach them, they behave differently. So the idea was to say, you can't stereotype. All the bad guys don't look the same. And so you have to figure out by behavior. Another game I released last year that got, actually for some reason people downloaded it, I don't think they got what it was about, was actually a matching game, which ostensibly looks like you're supposed to be matching by color, but the longer you play, the more the color band gets narrower and narrower until all the colors are basically some variation of black, and it's impossible to play. But as you play, you'll start to notice that one of the match tile behaves differently, and so you're playing based on the match tile. So that's a far more abstract version of Black-White. But the idea is to look at the mechanics and how the mechanics are driving some of our perspective. All right, we have that other question. Yeah.
I'd like to say thank you for using the Native Americans being one of the 4%. Awesome. Thank you. But one of the things that I see a lot of the times is when we talk about diversity, of course, it's that 4% that's down in the bottom that doesn't really get mentioned or talked about. And so when I see characters like Potter, of course, I go freaking nuts. But the main reason being is because he's not the drunken guy. He's the main character who's going to come in and he's going to do what he has to do, and he's calling people out on the crap that they're talking throughout the game, and that's one of the things that I love. And one thing that got me is he would have Mohawk and have English. And for me, I was like, why can't he be full Mohawk? And then I got to the point of when it comes to how do you bring people in? It's being that if you took somebody and placed them in Cherokee society just as it is in village life, from that cultural perspective, they have no clue where to go or what to do, and so they're drawn out of it because there's no one for them to go. But then I realized from being at English and at Mohawk, it creates an avenue by which they can learn with the character when it comes to like dancing with wolves. Go nuts. Oh, I love dancing with wolves. It was because he was the character by which they could see themselves. And as he learned, they learned. And so it was a way for them to be brought into that diversity to learn about someone else's perspective. And that's one thing that I really loved about Assassin's Creed. And so I got brought into that because, one, I could see myself in that character. And even though I'm not Mohawk, I'm from different other tribes, but I could see myself. And so I want to see if you would see that to be true, because that's one thing that I found in the type of work that you're doing.
So I very much appreciate the fact that you said this, because my nieces are all happy to be married, and I hate the fact that in video games you never chose it. The internet person. They come from New York. Same way with Mexicans. Have you seen Never Alone?
Never Alone?
Yeah, a game called Never Alone.
No.
Oh, you should check this out. It was funded by a tribe to tell tribal stories and tribal cultures. It's about one of the Inuit tribes, and it tells their stories, and it's an incredible experience. You should definitely check it out. It's the most respectful, best take on Native American culture that I've seen in a game. And I really like the fact that the tribe was just like, all right, this is a new form of media. We're gonna express ourselves through this, and we're not gonna wait for somebody else to do it. We're gonna start doing it. I thought it was really powerful.
That was one thing too, is when it comes to Native American culture, it's also recognizing that they're all various different pieces.
Yes.
So in being that it's an Inuit representation might be different than something else, but of course, it's that avenue by which, oh, it's not a Native American thing. There's something going on. And like out west in the Cherokee Nation, there's another artist by the name of Roy Boney who I really love, who's also working on a video game that deals with a Cherokee word going through our mythological beings that many of our men fought in our story.
And on just
that involves the language as well, which I thought was.
And it's from a design perspective, it kills me because there's so many great stories, right? Like we have done to death like Norse and there's so many stories we can reach out, and so I would love to see more. But
all right, we had so many questions. Let's get a couple of others. I'm gonna try to get you back in the front. So yep.
Just write a person. I don't know. It's just make a person, and also, I think it also might have something to do with the actual workforce and the sort of makeup of the people that are writing those stories, and the idea that if you have more people of diverse backgrounds being able to be like, oh wait, so like this woman can be more than one thing, like she can't just be strong, like she can also like cry sometimes, but then she can also be kind of awful. Or like the sort of example that I hold of Dragon Age is like, maybe don't have just one chick, have a whole bunch of them standing around a war table that each have their own unique stories. Like you don't have to have just the one person. You can have a whole bunch of dudes, but then, you know, you don't necessarily have to have the one woman that is a stand-in for all women ever.
My response is going to be a bit academic, so I think one of the things is the maturing medium. So if you look at the history of things like film, you sort of look at the broad, big acting that you would see in the first couple of films because it was silent and I had to communicate somehow, and then you know, sort of like Charlie Chaplin humor, and those things they're a phase, right? And so we're stuck in this cycle for a little while where we're sort of like, well, a really good game is like Street Fighter. And it's sort of like, well, no, that's a game, and that's a great game. I love that game. But there's all these other things, and part of the problem is we have to. I'll back up. I show a lot of games at museums and art venues, and the experience, the expectation experience, is very different there than it is on a mobile space. I have a minute to get you as a mobile developer before you're like, I'll get something else. And so that big acting and that big polar end, I am very male, I am very female, are a product of that environment. We're maturing the medium and creating new experiences. I think Never Alone's a good example. We actually we did a curated series game showcase at the Smithsonian American Art Museum this year, and Chris Topham did a lot of the organizations back there. And one of the things we did is we selected Never Alone, but that has to be in the right environment. If I set up Never Alone in an arcade environment, there's a very different response and expectation. You know, if I put it next to Street Fighter 2, it's like I get 100 rounds of Street Fighter 2 in the time it takes me to get reasonably far and more involved and more mature people.
This is back to where it's our responsibility as educators to get more women in. I've come from a very musical household, and I jam the blues with my young daughters, and I tell them, you're too young to sing the real blues because you haven't had the experience. So sing about missing a song, or sing about whatever, but you can't sing real blues, you haven't been there. And as much as I would love to write a really in-depth female character, I don't think I'll ever do it as well as some of you do. The mother in the mother in Train Your Dragon 2, by the way, one of the best female characters in it. I just thought she was fully feminine and fully kick-ass, and so I want to see more of that.
3-second question in the back I saw. Raise your hand. First go. All right, yellow. Great.
I watched the actual playing from a diverse point of view. If that would have been difficult, if you've gotten a lot of backlash from doing that. I know a lot more like major outlets such as like IGN and GameStop have different voices, but they all think of the same thing, but they're writing from Polygon or something like that. But there's probably a little bit more history can be diverse and talk about diversity. I'm wondering if you cut your major outlets and have not backlash, and if you've gotten a lot of backlash writing from a diverse point of view from like major projects like that.
I would say that the thing that bothers me the most is when people say this is shoehorned in, that you're putting race or gender into it. It was already there. Like, it was there and I saw it and I said something about it. But the idea that there is a neutral point of view, I think that's what needs to go. That when people say that writing about games from a neutral perspective is writing from the perspective of a person, an imaginary person that I think of as neutral. And this imaginary person likes certain things, so they like certain things about a game that we kind of arbitrarily label gameplay, but they don't care about other things that we kind of arbitrarily label like political content or theme or, that's imposing one right way to think about games as being the neutral one. And it's one that has been imposed for a long time. We're starting to see people say, okay, you know what, as a person who plays games, every time I play a game and there's this element in it, it bothers me. It bothers me as much as bad controls or bad controls and bad writing might for you, because to me this is a kind of bad writing. It's a kind of lazy, crappy, decision to make in making a game. But we get told that's politicizing it. That's putting something in there, and that's it's that perception that we started with this pristine, neutral thing that was mostly white guys. That was the game culture. That there's people coming in and putting race and gender and other issues into it, but it was always there. It was just that you didn't see it, and that's the kind of criticism. I can take other kinds of criticism, but that kind of criticism automatically I get mad at. I say, why'd you put this issue?
I hate it. It sucks. The personal is political. Every single decision that you make on an everyday basis, every privilege that you have, every privilege that you don't have, that is all political. Power is not something that one person has from top down. Power is something that is negotiated through everyday interactions. It's all political. You telling me to get your politics out of my games is a political statement.
I think it's a good way to wrap it up.